Welcome, fellow seekers of challenge and triumph, to the SufferSooner podcast. Join us on a journey where ordinary souls embark on extraordinary endeavors. From the relentless grind of gravel to the punishing gauntlet that is triathlon, we've tasted our fair share of suffering. So fellow endurance warriors, let's lace up our shoes, strap on our goggles, and dive headfirst into the challenge, knowing that with every step, stroke, and pedal forward, we grow stronger together. All right, guys, welcome to episode 27. We are back in our usual places, back in good old Missouri.
Misery?
Yeah, Missouri.
It feels weird being back.
It was a hard drive back.
Yeah.
I was not a fan of that long ride back. So
no, what was it? 9 hours, I think it was. Eight and a half, 9 hours, and I always say it every time I leave Colorado. The hardest part is watching the mountains just disappear in the rearview mirror, and you start planning the next trip out as soon as you see those mountains go away. So it was a great trip. I had a great time. What was it? 10 days. It was about 8 or 9 of those days were riding, and
I think we only took really 2 rest days. So.
Yeah.
And one of those was like just forced because of weather. And then the other one we took off because we were just kind of it was later in the week. It was, I think, day 9. It was the day before Mount Evans or Mount Blue Sky. Mm-hmm. And we were just like, I'm just not going to risk jeopardizing, the making a long ride even longer because I'm too tired to turn the pedals over.
It's such a wild race, to the top of that mountain. It's only 28 miles, and it's almost 7,000 feet of climbing. And it's like, it doesn't sound like a lot when you think, oh, it's only 23 miles. And then you're like, oh my gosh, 7K of climbing. Like, you're lucky if you get 7K and 100 miles around here. And, we're talking about knocking that out in 27 miles. So it's just, and we'll talk about it, I think, in the episode here, but it's just different when you're climbing, especially for that much. I mean, I'm sure the folks that live in Colorado or in the area and get mountains a lot probably don't think much of it, but for us, I think the one thing I noticed the most was just the different muscle grouping that you use, like the balance of sort of how the muscles felt. It's just a totally different feeling.
Yeah, it took a while for the firing patterns to kind of come around. Like, I didn't really get really good climbing legs until I think the last day we were there. Every day was a huge struggle for me. Like we were saying in the previous podcast, if it was 3 or less percent, like I could basically rail it.
Right.
But when it started going 5%, 6%, it was like somebody just took the chair right from under me. I could barely get up it. I was using I looked like I was just all over the bike, weaving back and forth, doing everything I could to just try to keep power on the pedals. But yeah.
And when we covered last week's podcast, and we talked a little bit about the routes and how steep some of those grades were, and that's different than what the last few times I've been to Colorado. I don't know I've ever really had much 10, 12, 15% grades in Colorado before. It was always, that 3 to 6% range that I've always ridden. And that was a fun experience, but I could tell as the week was going on, you were getting stronger and stronger. Like you were starting to acclimate a little bit, I think, to the altitude. It wasn't bugging you as much. We were riding routes that had more of that 4 to 6% range instead of the 8 to 12. And I know the night before we did Mount Blue Sky, I know you were kind of thinking about, what's it going to be and how much torture it's going to be.
Yeah, I was like, how long did it take you last time? And you were like, oh, it took me like 5 hours. And I was like, okay, well, I'll plan on that. I'll plan on 5 hours of just being out there in misery, and just like, all right. Because I was like, I did not go in there with any confidence at all. I was just like, I'm like, what's your goal? And you're like, oh, I'm just trying to beat the last time. And I'm like, yeah, the way you've been climbing, you're definitely going to beat that. And I was like, I'm just going to try to survive.
Yeah. It was
because we climbed up Idaho Springs the week, almost a week before, whatever. It was like, a couple of days before. And it took us almost 2 hours. Yeah. Well, it took me 2 hours. You were you were doing so much better.
Yeah. Well, I think like I said, I think the route itself, and I was kind of telling you this afterwards. I think the Blue Sky route favored you a little bit more as because you were getting stronger as the week went on. Um, and I think that as for me as the week went on, I felt like my legs were, I would say, flattening a bit, and in fact, they were probably starting to feel the fatigue of the week. And I think that the rest days really hurt me quite a bit, and that's something else I think we can talk about in terms of tips and things to help try to prevent that from happening. And it, like I said, it was a great experience. Highly recommend if you get a chance to go out to the triple bypass, Mount Blue Sky hill climb. You get a chance to do those two events. You should absolutely go do them. Blue Sky though isn't going to be on next year, I don't think, because
No, they're closing the route. They're planning on repaving it, which is a good idea because it was a little rough in some sections. Right. It was a little. I guess they have a lot of, some seismic activity that happens up there, or just mountain shifting in the hot and cold. But the middle section by Summit Lake was, it was like it was paved, but it was like they paved over boulders, and like it was like this rocky. Well, it wasn't really rocky, but it was like bumpy and a lot of jumping from puddle to puddle, and it was just kind of like, it was wild. It was the wildest paved road I've ever been on.
Yeah, and so they're going to have that shut down next year, it looks like, and I don't know if it'll open in time for for any kind of bike riding up there, but then we, as we talked about last week, we explored the area around Estes Park and some of the outskirts, just west of Boulder, and just can't recommend it enough. So you get a chance to go do that, you should absolutely do it. Hey Travis, what was the total mileage we had for the time away? I can't remember.
So in the last 2 weeks, we put in 401 miles with 36,515 feet of elevation, if you trust my Garmin as far as elevation. But it hasn't been too far off from yours or anything else. So, 1 week we did 17,000 feet elevation, and the next one we did like 18,000. So, the elevation was, we did a little less mileage this last week. Coming, but we did a lot more straight climbing, I think is the best way to put it.
Yeah, and I know that doesn't sound, so I think it's funny because on last week's route we ran into another rider that happened to recognize the kit I was wearing, and then he added us to Strava, if I remember right. He added me. I don't.
Yeah, he added you because you're for whatever reason. Danny is he's the face of this podcast. People love. they add him on Strava. Like people who know me, like I'll talk to him. I'll chat their ear off. But for some reason, I guess maybe I look like I'm suffering more than everybody else, and so they're like, I don't want to know what that guy's doing.
So it's funny because he adds me on Strava. Of course, I add him back, and I really get a kick out of like seeing what other people are doing. I think it's a really good way to kind of. I don't want to compare myself. I don't think that's the right way to look at it.
No, it's just nice to see. Yeah, there's always going to be somebody better than you, but there's or doing more or whatever. But the other thing is you're just seeing what other people like, what routes are cool, what they do, and then it was just cool to see like how that guy he puts in a lot of work.
Oh my gosh, it's like a full-time job. He rides 36 to 40 hours a week, and 700 miles a week. I think every day was 130 plus miles, and it's just awesome to see that. In fact, so when we look back at our mileage, we don't rattle the mileage off here to brag about it. It was a big week though. It was a lot for us. We have other obligations. We always say we're not pro. We just come out here and do this stuff for fun and try to learn and teach others. But yeah, so for us to get 400 something miles and 35K. 35K of climbing in perspective, that's it takes us probably a good month to get 35K, maybe 2 months to get 35K around here on a normal work week. So,
my thing is I always like to say we're just average people doing above average things, and that's basically what we're doing. Like we ride we're on average like 150 miles a week. We don't, we're not
Yeah.
we're not dedicating 40 hours a week to
Right.
this. We did dedicate a lot of time to Ironman. Like when the training requires it, we pull the
Dialed
schedule
in.
around. But we're talking about like there's some people out in in the world that riding is their passion, and they treat it like a full-time job or a second or a secondary job, and they ride 20 to 40 hours a week. So
Right.
I mean, that's just, if you can do that and that's how your life works out, that's so awesome. And we're just awesome, just happy to be able to ride with it. We rode with that guy for a little while.
Yeah.
I mean, we tried to ride with him for a
bit.
little while, and then he zoomed off. So
Yeah, he's a quick guy. So I think again we got our climbing in chunks. With some of those steeper sections and a few routes, and then so let's talk about the last race of the week, the Mount Blue Sky Hill Climb. And for those of you who don't know, that used to be the Mount Evans Hill Climb, the Bob Cook Classic, our memorial ride. And I think that so I did this ride 3 years ago, I want to say, and it was when I was just trying to figure out what cycling was really all about, and I didn't have a lot of experience, and I would say I have more experience now than I did then. And for me personally, you said it, Travis. I the only thing I wanted to do with this was beat the time from a few years ago and do it knowing that I had just ridden the full week in Colorado as well, which I did not do last. I mean, the last time I came up and did this, it was the only thing I did. I did one shakeout ride beforehand, so I was really fresh going into it. And I really just wanted to get a time that was better and just see how it played out. And then for you, I mean, I know just completing is never really the goal for you. I knew you were going to race it. I was just glad you didn't have like 2 Red Bulls or 2 Monster Energy drinks that morning.
Yeah,
brutal.
My thing is always like, well, the way the week was going, to tell you the truth, I was just, I was like, well, if I can just hang on to Danny and until the elevation just gets me, that'll be a win in my book, right?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
so I'm like, or if I can distance Danny enough in the beginning, if I can hold him off, because eventually the elevation's going to get to me and I'm going to have to slow down. And Danny on steeper grades, he's a faster climber than me. Like on all, I think if we came into this race and we didn't take a full day off, which we learned that Danny does not do good with a full day off.
not at altitude anyway.
Not at altitude. He needs to ride almost every day going into the race, which I can do either or. I think I needed to freshen up, and I think it was probably good for me to take a whole day off.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, so what was your previous time, Danny? Do you remember? Do you recall?
Yeah, so ride time was 4:30, 4 hours 30 minutes. I think total time was probably somewhere 5 or more, because I did take breaks. I took a break at the aid station 3 years ago. I took a little bit longer break, and then I was starting to cramp up towards the top. So from about with about 10 miles to go, in that last 10 miles, I probably stopped 4 or 5 times because my quads were cramping up real bad. My legs just as a whole felt like garbage because it was the altitude and dehydration were really a factor. And again, back to the experiencing, I really didn't know how to dress for that ride. I had arm warmers on and leg warmers on, and I just didn't need that much. And again, this was 3 years ago. So I think, again, the goal of this time, and if we recall, the forecast was rain starting around 9 a.m. and then maybe even by 11, with temperatures as you go up in elevation, temperatures going from 55 or so at the base of the climb to 41 at the top of the climb. And so we thought, oh shoot, if it's going to rain, it's going to be cold and miserable. So I was thinking coming into it, like, we're going to be doing pretty good if we hit 4:30, because if it starts raining and you get cold, and it's just the altitude, who knows what's going to happen. And I don't think go ahead.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, Mount Evans is the highest paved, or Mount Blue Sky now, it's the highest paved road in North America. And it tops out at 14,200 and something feet, which is 4,300 meters for our European listeners.
Yeah, right.
And this is we start at half that distance at 7K, which is what 2,000 meters or whatever.
Meters, yeah. So we were really worried about the weather and obviously the temperature drop, but man, I'll tell you, you couldn't have picked a better day. It was absolutely beautiful all the way to the top.
It was, from the weather report that we were getting, it said it was basically just going to start storming at like noon. And we were just like, oh man, that's going to suck because we won't be able to see anything. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this picture behind Danny is the picture of the day. There was barely any any big clouds in the sky, and it was just sunny and perfect.
Yeah,
it was by far one of the I was just so happy because we got to ride up there, and of course we did. We've ridden from Idaho Springs and up to Echo Lake, and then we've ridden down from Echo Lake to Idaho Springs. So I've seen that part of the climb, but I've never seen the Mount Blue Sky part. So it was great to be able to finally see all that greatness.
Yeah.
So
this little section here. So I've got another picture from 3 years ago. It's much more cloudy, and it was on last week's 2 weeks ago podcast, I think. Yeah. But this little section here is well above the tree line, and it just kind of gives you a sense of the terrain and kind of what you're looking at as you're going up. But if I recall this particular section of the road, when you look back to your left, going across that little section that you can see in the picture, all you see is just all the smaller mountains in the area.
Yeah,
they look like miniature replicas. I mean, it's just so amazing how small they look when you're sitting there at this was probably 12,500, maybe 13,000 feet of elevation. Where that road is. So it's just amazing to be riding, and you're grinding up a hill, but you just take a little peek off to the left and you get instant inspiration. It's amazing. It's beautiful up there. So the idea was to try to beat the times, and maybe let's just start off about from the beginning. So it's a mass start rolling out of Idaho Springs, and we hung together for the first couple miles, I think I want to say, and then all of a sudden you started just motoring along, and I knew where my legs were at. They were junk. They were not having it for that first hour of the ride. They were just not having it. This was like 3-4% grade. So I'm just like, you got to be kidding me. What's going on here? I'm not kidding, man. I got to a point about halfway up that first section, about 45 minutes to an hour in, and I'm like, I think I'm just going to turn around and go back. This is miserable.
It's going to make a long day even longer. I'm out of here.
I'm out of here.
Yeah, no, so I just started riding, and then I got through the warm up. I get 10 minutes in, you feel warmed up.
Yeah.
And so then I was just like, okay, well, I want to hit, I had some heart rate targets that I wanted to hit. And so I started to go, okay, warm up's over. Let's start putting in the work and see what we can do. And I just started hitting the heart rate. And then I think that's when I came up next to you, because I basically just was following you for a while, and then I was like, all right, man, well, how you feeling? And you were like, I don't feel so good. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll see you at the top. And then I just kind of paced off, and the next thing I know, I didn't look back. You always see in the Tour de France, people looking back to see where your competitors are. I just did not. I put my head down. I watched. I had my plan that I was sticking to, and I just executed, and that was it. I went into full on race mode, and I got to Echo Lake where the aid station was, and I had to go to the bathroom really bad, and I didn't want to just pull off the side of the road and just pee in the lake or pee on a tree or whatever. So I waited at the bathroom, and of course there's a line, and I'm like, oh man, this is where Danny's gonna catch me. He's gonna catch me. He's coming after me.
He makes his move,
and this is where he makes his move. And I saw this guy who had white Specialized shoes, and I was like, oh my god, there he is. And I ducked in the bathroom, and I ducked in the bathroom and I hurried up and I got out and I didn't even stop to get water or anything. I was like, I have enough water to get to the top. If not, I'll be a little dehydrated.
Sure.
But I got to catch that guy. But the thing is like at altitude, you don't really think clearly. So I had a long time to like think about what that guy looked like, who I thought was Danny's doppelganger. He was like around the same size. He almost had the same pedaling style. Okay. But I remembered, I was like, wait, what jersey was Danny wearing? And I was like, and I look around and I'm like, oh yeah, he was wearing my jersey. Yeah. And I was like, we were going twinsies.
The triple bypass from the week before.
Yeah, triple bypass. And I was like, oh, that guy was wearing the Grand Slam jersey. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe Danny is ahead of me because I couldn't see who was passing me in the bathroom, but I knew Danny was going to probably stop for water because the running joke is the camel. Danny is the camel, and the camel gets thirsty, and he usually needs water. So I knew if I didn't see him at the aid station, there was a chance that he either snuck through there faster than I thought, or that I might still be ahead of him. So I pressed on.
Yeah, and the reality was I was just back in my own little world having a sufferfest for the first hour and a half of the ride, and I hit that aid station, and all I knew was I had to get water to top off my bottle because I only went through one bottle on the way up. And they also at this race they have the like old school plastic water bottles that say like the Mount Evans Hill Climb or Blue Sky Hill Climb, and I didn't get one of those a couple years ago. So in my mind, I'm like, oh, I got to get one of those bottles. Like the bottle is it's nothing. It's just a little trinket, right? But I had to have it because that's what happens when you're at altitude.
Yeah, you just get fixated and you're just like, I have to do this.
So I literally, I had my bottle, I filled it up and I went back like, wait a second, I got to get a bottle. So I went back over to the table, grabbed it, shoved it in my jersey pocket. And so I'm carrying like an extra 2 pounds of water going up the freaking, I'm like, I got 4,000 more feet of climbing and I'm worried about a damn bottle in the back pocket. But
yeah,
I got it.
Yeah. So that's.
Yeah. So we were, I think if I had to get, I didn't go back and look at our data, but I bet you were probably about 5 minutes ahead of me at that aid station. And I think you spent 1 minute roughly there and I spent 2, the extra minute to go back and get the other bottle. And so I think from that point, you were probably about 5 or 6 minutes ahead of me. And of course you didn't know that. And then I start going off and I get through the aid station. And from there, I think that aid station is about 10,500 feet elevation. So you only got about another 500 to 1,000 feet and you're out of the tree line. And so we got out of the tree line and all of a sudden my Garmin picks up and it shows your name on there because we must have had a little brief moment of cell phone signal. Yeah. And it says, Travis added. And I'm like, ooh, okay. So I swipe over to the screen and it said at that point, it said you were 1.1 miles ahead of me. So I'm doing the math in my head. I'm like, okay, at 7.5 miles an hour. I'm like, okay, about 10 minutes ahead of me. Okay, so I knew you're about 10 minutes ahead of me there. And then all of a sudden it said 300 feet ahead of me. I'm like, oh, I'm going to catch him. I can't wait to catch him. Because I knew if I could catch you on a 4 or 5% grade, it would have been over.
It would have been over.
I'd have been in your head the whole way and the soul harvester would have come back.
Yeah. And so I kept seeing, and this is the difference between me and Danny. I kept seeing it going, Danny added, Danny removed, Danny added. And I'm like, what's going on? And I'm like, I'm not looking at where he is. I can look I could have easily looked on the map and just like seen where he was to know if he was behind me or not. I was like, I don't even want to know. I don't want to know. I'm just putting my head down and I'm just doing the work. And I'm like, you pretend like he's chasing you down is what I kept telling myself. And I was like, I just kept pedaling and pedaling and pedaling. And I was, and just slowly crawling and passing people, on the way up there. And I would get to points where like, especially around 12,000 feet where I was just kind of like, my legs were like getting kind of filled up and I was just like, oh, I want to stop. And then I was like, don't you dare stop.
Don't you do it.
Don't you do it.
So the beauty of this race too, is they start the USA Cycling guys behind us.
Yep. So it's the USA Cycling. It's a hill climb series, and it's also the state championship.
Yeah.
Yep, hill climb series. So we saw a lot of fast kids.
Oh my gosh, there was.
I would say
there were some powerful legs in those groups. And it's fun because you get, you kind of, I think we got a 30-minute or an hour head start. I don't remember. And just after the first aid station, those guys started passing it. At least they started passing me. And I'm sure they weren't too far behind you. So that's when I knew, okay, so those guys are going like, 10, 11, 12 miles an hour, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And we're going, 7 to 8 if we're lucky. Because we're not pro. And,
yeah.
And it's fun to watch, but it's like it just kind of gives you a little bit of juice in the legs when those folks start coming up behind you, and some of them catch a wheel for just a minute and then they just zoom on by or just go right by. And so we get to the section, I want to say it's about 12,000 feet. So that's when I started to feel like, okay, 12,000 feet. I knew where we were at because I knew how I felt on a good day at Loveland Pass, and that's 12K. And I started to feel that way on this hill. And so I knew we were about 12K, and it just so happens that around that time, you start switchbacking up the mountain, and you can look up and you can see like 4 switchbacks ahead of you if you just look up the mountainside. And that was when Garmin was doing its little trick again. It kept telling me you were like anywhere from 300 feet to 800 feet ahead of me. And I just kept looking. I was hoping I would see. So that was motivating me the whole time. Like, because I did not want, by that point, my legs finally started to come around a little bit. That, when I go back and look at the numbers, the power was actually pretty decent, but just perceived effort, it felt horrible. Like I just felt miserable. But I kept looking up, hoping I would catch a glimpse and see you. And actually, we found a picture. There's a picture that one of the photographers took, and it's looking up looking up that switchback, and you're giving him a thumbs up.
Yeah, I give him a big old thumbs up.
That's exactly what I thought I was going to see when I looked up there. So it's so funny. There's a picture out there that's exactly what I was hoping to see. Because if I saw you up there with a thumbs up, man, I was chasing you down.
Yeah, I would have been like, it would have been the turtle race to the finish where we're just absolutely turning ourselves out to go 8 miles an hour up a hill and just be throwing up everywhere.
Yeah, but I think, and I don't know about you, but for me, it was when I got to about 10 miles left in the race. I just kept looking at the miles remaining. Well, I knew how many miles were remaining, but I just kept looking at them going, okay, just one more mile and I'm down to single digits. One more mile and I'm down to, I only have 8 miles to go. Now I only have 7 miles to go. And once I got to 5, we got to that Summit Lake, and you had a nice little, about maybe 3/4 mile descent. So it's the only real relief in the climb. And
there's like another little section too that was just like, I don't know, like 1/4 mile. Yeah. But any relief from constant pedaling is better than welcome. Nothing.
Yeah, but again, that was the section where the road was pretty choppy, so you really couldn't gain a lot of speed off of it. But it was just nice to have the relief. And when I got to 5 miles left, that's when I looked at the clock and I realized I got a chance to do pretty good with the time here. And I think you finished. Let's see, Travis, you finished like sub 3:30, if I remember right?
Yeah, I went 3:29:52.
Yeah,
as according to my as according to my Garmin, whatever.
Yeah.
No, I was doing the exact same thing you did. You know what? This hill climb reminded me a lot of a marathon. The way I think of a marathon,
right,
is I have spots where I need to fuel, right? Like taking on a gel. And then every mile I was drinking like a little sip from my bottle.
Yeah.
And so that would be just like on a regular marathon where it would just be like every mile I'm doing, taking a sip or whatever. And then I did the exact same thing. I was like, oh, we get to Echo Lake. I'm like, oh, you're only halfway. You're only half marathon left. And then you get to like 10 miles. You're like, oh, I only have 10 miles left. After this, it's only single digits. And then it's like, oh, 5 miles left. I got less than a 10K, and then you get to 3, and then you're like, oh, less than a 5K.
I know.
Like, why? And I'm like, why am I thinking about running? I hate running.
I hate it. Why do I do
why am I thinking about it? Yeah. And then I would just keep going. I would just keep turning the pedals over. I did stop one time. That wasn't the aid station. It was to take a picture of a mountain goat, or a mountain sheep. Yeah, it was on one of the switchbacks, and I didn't know if I would ever get to see one ever again. So I was just like, this is my one chance. So I pulled over, took a picture, and then I finished. It was right before we went through the 1K to go. banner. And then we get to the, and then of course I get to the parking lot and there's like a whole herd of them up there. There's like 5 of them just like jumping on cars and jumping on the railing and checking out everybody's bike to see if there's anything to eat.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, well, I guess I could have.
Didn't have to stop.
I didn't have to stop, but it was 30 seconds to snap 2 pictures and then jump back on there. Because the whole time I was thinking Danny is on his way or he's waiting there for me.
Man, I tell you, I wish that were the case. It would have been fun to see the look on your face if I zoom up by you. But no, I ended up finishing about 9 minutes or so, 10 minutes behind you, something like that, like 3:38. So I mean, it obliterated the time from the attempt 3 years ago, which is validating that all the work is paying off, and it's really good feeling. But
I said, I think on a good day, you by all intents and purposes, you were climbing a lot better than I was the whole week.
I mean,
so
and again, it's never about the comparison, but I mean, when you got a big number on, you kind of want to, see.
I mean, it's a race, right?
I wasn't keeping track, but I think I put like 5 minutes into you on Level and Pass, and that was like a 5-mile climb. So I knew
you put and you were on a lot of time,
but you were on a horrible day that day. So I knew, I just kind of knew that if I could get the legs to come around, that's why I said I think the first half of the race was where you got all your time on me. I think that's because I think you were about 8 to 10 minutes ahead of me there.
Yeah, that was kind of my plan was to really put in some work while the elevation was low, and then once the it started to kick up, it was just basically hold on to an easy heart rate or a doable heart rate for me, and then just hold that until the last basically mile, and then from there just go as hard as you can.
Maybe let's talk about that just a little bit, because I think I know we discussed it throughout the week last week when we were on some of those harder climbs at elevation, and we talked a lot about we train primarily off power, especially here at home. Everything is off of power.
Yeah.
You really only look at the heart rate if you're just maybe fatigued or something like that. You just want you need to back it off. But when we got to elevation, especially at anywhere from about 8,000-9,000 feet on up, for me, and I don't know about you, but for me, I started looking at my heart rate a lot more, and that's what I remembered from a few years ago. Was it's a lot easier to manage the heart rate, because man, that heart rate gets into threshold or above, you're in trouble. Like, you're not going to recover very fast up there, and you're just burning up matches. So maybe how did that work out for you? Like, did you kind of find the same thing, or how did you approach it?
Yeah. So in the beginning, I wanted to keep it below 130, or basically between 135 and 140.
Yeah. So for us other people, Travis, So
my heart rate is abnormal. My heart rate is very low compared to most people. Yeah. So that would be like, I don't know, probably like
140 to 155.
Yeah. So that would be like right in the beginning of your or end of your zone 2, I would say for most people. Yeah. Then I went to a more tempo effort, which would be, but not threshold, so sub-threshold. So I really made it so that like when I got above the tree line, that I did not do anything that caused me to go into threshold. Yeah. And so like if I stood up on the bike to reposition, I made sure I slowed down, because what happens is like once you're above and you're in elevation like that, your heart rate tends to just start taking off. And so like you'll start at like 140, like let's say 146, and my threshold heart rate's 154. So it will just take from 146, 147, 148, 49, 50, 50. It will keep going up, even though I'm pedaling normally at my tempo power. So it will throw me into threshold if I don't watch it closely. So that's what I did, was basically I watched that heart rate like a freaking hawk, man. It was and then the power really just settled, because you have to ride. I mean, you have to do what you have to do to get up the hill. The one thing I did do is whenever it relieved and my heart rate would go down when I was at elevation, I would shift up so that I would keep it in that same 140 heart rate, just to keep the speed up.
So anything else you want to cover on the climb itself? Because I think that's a good jump into some of the tips.
Yeah. So I mean, that's how we pace a lot of these bigger efforts, especially the So like like I said, it felt more like a marathon because that's how I pace a marathon, right? Like I don't run the pace because I'm not that kind of runner. I can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to run, 7:30s or 10-minute miles. And I'm just going to do that until it happens. No, I have to run to heart rate. And so if my heart rate starts to climb, then I know I'm messing something up and I have to slow down. So,
yeah. So I think, I think you hit on a really important thing there is that, when I saw the little descents that were coming up, because I think you probably do the same thing. Like when we're on a climb, or when I'm on a climb, I like to see the Climb Pro or whatever the feature of the Jeep, the head unit is. It kind of shows you the grade coming up and gives you an idea if there's some red section, green section. It doesn't always tell the truth, by the way.
No, and sometimes it lags behind where you are. You'll be descending and be like, I'm supposed to be going up of 6% right now. I don't know where this is at.
Yeah.
So
or the little green section that ended up being 11%. That was fun. So because it's just like a little spike. This particular road where we're at, it does not have very many sections of 11%, but there are a couple, like maybe 100-meter sections where it pitches up just a little bit to get over a land feature, and then you're back to your 3 or 4% grade. But yeah, it said I was on a green 4%, and it was like 11 or 12%. I'm like, oh my gosh. But I think when we had those couple of descents, one of the things I'm with you, by the way. I did the same thing. Like when I saw a descent coming up, I found my relief by going like a typical zone 3 on a flat. That's where I found my relief. I did not stop pedaling and just coast it. And oh my gosh, the number of people that I just flew by just by keeping it in zone 3, getting that relief in zone 3. And how different was it when you got to spin at like a normal 90 plus cadence on a hill?
So nice.
Wasn't that nice? Like, I'm still putting out a zone 3 power effort, but man, it felt so good to be able to spin it out versus having to grind it at, 80 cadence or whatever it was. So.
Yeah, and that's what I tell a lot of the athletes I coach is, the hill doesn't really stop until you're back up to speed. Mm-hmm. So if you have like a spot that's relief, or you crest the hill or whatever, you'll be amazed on how much ground you can cover if you don't do the usual just coast at the top of the hill. Like so many, I passed all sorts of people just coasting on this downhill section, and I was putting out basically the same amount of power that I was climbing. Now I'm just putting that into the descent because basically the climb was my high tempo effort. And so I was just like, well, I just might as well just keep that going. And so, and I passed like 10 or 15 guys until I got stuck behind this one guy who he knew the road, so he knew where he was going, but he wasn't descending as fast as I would have. So I was like, well, it was a trade-off, right? It's like, well, I don't know exactly what's ahead of me. This guy does, but he's also not going as fast as I would like. So.
Right. Some of the other things I noticed too, and I think we see this a lot when we ride around here, is on some of the smaller hills, is a lot of people just wouldn't use their gears. It's like they are just mashing, and I look, I'm not one to sit and critique other people's riding styles because everybody has their own. But when I'm watching somebody who's clearly like grunting and crawling over their bike to get up a 4% grade, and you look down and they're sitting there in the middle of their cog, I'm just like, wait a second, like you should probably downshift and like spin that out a little bit. But who am I? I'm just whatever. But
it's just like, I understand, like, you want to shift up and stand up and do that. But like these guys were trying to ride this whole climb in like the middle of the cog, and they were just like, they would burst ahead. When they would recover, and then they would slow down to a crawl, and there would just be like this 10 cadence of just grinding. And then they would get recovered, and then they would try to spin it up again. And there was a couple people like doing that. I was like, I don't think that's very efficient. So
it just goes back to the whole consistency thing. I think, my goal throughout the whole ride was just to try to be consistent and not have too many peaks and valleys in my power. And because that's the type of ride that it is. Now, if this was a roller course, that'd be a whole different story. You know, I'd probably try to accelerate up and over the little hump, and then you get a little boost down the hill, and you kind of freewheel it for a little bit because you're spinning out. But on a climb like this, and really anytime you're in these situations, I think it's important. You know, you pay for all the gears, use all the gears, and make sure that you're able to hold a consistent power. And then vice versa to that, I saw some people that were just spinning. They weren't spinning, but they were in a little too easy of a gear, and they're robbing themselves of power. And then you start the telltale of that was they started like bouncing in the saddle. You know, you could just see them
they were just riding and they're just like this, and you're just like you can shift up a little and probably just take a little deeper breaths. But I think, you know, when you get to elevation like that, like one, you're not thinking clearly, and you're just trying to like
survive.
You're just trying to do whatever you think is the whatever, you know, whatever idea comes to your mind is kind of like what sticks in there, and then it just gets played over and over and over. So it's like they were probably just like, just spin it, just spin it, just spin it, just spin it. I gotta spin it, and it's just like it's gotta go, and it's just like, I mean, it was me. The same thing I was doing was just going like, keep it at 140, keep it at 140, keep it at 140. You know, just like don't rail it, don't rail it, don't rail it.
So you mentioned breathing. What about breathing, especially at the altitude?
So yeah, I saw a lot of people. So I always do that. It's called like box breathing. It's you know, it's definitely YouTube it, learn how to do it. It's such a great technique. It's basically you're breathing from your diaphragm and not. I see a lot of people, especially at altitude, and this happens to me too. Like if you're not thinking about it, your body just kind of defaults to this really heavy chest breathing, and you're not getting good oxygen exchange. So what you got to do is do those big belly breaths where you're just like really kind of, you know, forcing your diaphragm to work. And I did that the whole time, and I was just, you know, and to the point where when we got done with this hill climb, I was coughing like a smoked camel on filters or something. Like I was just coughing all at dinner. It was horrible, but I mean, my lungs were tore up from just breathing as heavy as I did. But the thing is there's, you know, there's just not enough oxygen, you know, up there. So you need to do everything you can. You need to make sure that you're relaxed everywhere that you can be. You're not wasting in your energy, and you're just breathing as deeply as you can, because otherwise you're just not going to get enough.
Yeah. You know, one thing I kind of in that vein too is, I found it really important because what I found was, when I focus on the breathing, like getting that nice deep breath, I would find where the tension was. Like I could feel the tension in the shoulders a little bit more. So I just always remind myself, like, just let the shoulders drop, relax the upper body, really anchor yourself in the saddle. Like it's all this basic stuff. But again, at altitude, like
your body is freaking out.
Yeah. And it's like if you were riding a bike in a pool, like you're just trying to figure out like, okay, how, so I think what's really important is like, don't be afraid to go back to the basics on a lot of things. Anchor the sit bones, power through the core, like feel everything through the hips. Don't try to drive with your quads, and don't try to grip onto the handlebars. And, you know, especially like when you get up to like get out of the saddle, I found so much relief just getting up out of the saddle and just stretching the legs out and just using the body weight. We talked about this, I think, in the last episode. Use the body weight to just kind of push the pedals over, and just that little bit of like 2 or 3 rotations just to get a little bit of stretch and a little bit of relief. And you sit back down, you settle back in, and I think the legs felt, you know, a little bit better. And as long as you don't try to muscle through that pedal stroke standing up, your heart rate really didn't change. At least mine didn't change too much. Now I did a couple of times because I got a little out over the front of the bike and put all the weight on the front wheel, and then it's like you're slowing all your momentum down. So like, just because I was, you know, kind of out of it a little bit, but generally speaking, I mean, if you can just stand up and just use the body weight, and so just little things like that, I think help to give you sort of those cues to, you know, breathe deep, power through the core, like all those things I just said. I think it's really important to make sure you're kind of getting that little mantra going, because it's easy to forget those things.
Yeah. So. And definitely with that box breathing, you can do that, you know, at sea level or at regular places. Like you can, the more you do that, and you do that as you train for these events, the better it's another way of like basically just being able to put out the power and recover. Like
That's right.
if you really focus on the breathing part, it's almost like, especially if you're someone who doesn't like know how to breathe correctly in the beginning, it's almost like cheating. You just be like, oh my gosh, that's why it's so easy for them to, pedal up that hill or go this fast. It's like, oh, this is a lot easier. This is so much better. And it's because you're supplying your body with the oxygen it needs to power your muscles. And it just, you'd be surprised at what happens when you can supply it with what it needs. So,
So, so I think those were some of the things I picked up. Anything else you'd add to that?
No, I think if you ever get a chance to go to Colorado, take it, because Colorado is pretty awesome. Yeah. There's a lot more climbing that we could have done that we didn't get a chance to do. So there's at least some stuff for us to do next time. And it was just great.
Yeah, it's a great time. So, well, now I'm anxious to get back out in the flatlands here and see how the fitness has changed a little bit.
Yeah, see if we can get some KOMs and stuff.
Be nice. So maybe
or get closer.
Yeah, right.
Get some PRs. Yeah,
at least. So good stuff, man. Well, great time.
All right, man.
Good.
All right. Well, suffer complete.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Please, if you like what we are doing here, leave a like, rate us, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. It really helps us grow and finds us more SufferSooner squad mates. And remember, when the finish line feels impossibly far away, we don't give up, we push harder, we dig deeper, and we find solace in the knowledge that our suffering is temporary and our resilience is forever.